My name's David Shiers, my particular interest and passion is about trying to keep the body in mind for people who experience their first episode of psychosis. And the reason I think that's important is I speak as a carer of a daughter who developed a psychotic illness about 20 years ago. And the idea of whole life, I think, is about holistic. And to deny that people's bodies also exist with their minds is a fairly stupid thing to do. So that's my take. In terms of declaration of interest, I think the main declaration of interest is that I'm probably would be called an over-involved dad. So for 20 years, what we were faced with our daughter, my wife's a practiced community psychiatric nurse for a time. I'm a GP from North Staffordshire. And neither of us were prepared for what it was like to have a 16-year-old member of our family become very, very unwell and very distressed in a system that I just couldn't believe. So I became involved as an advocate, in a sense, after initial complaint, to try and improve services in England, and hopefully in Wales too. The idea of early intervention, I think, is gaining traction. But certainly in England, this was my job for the time. I gave up being a GP to be involved in the early intervention programme. But that absolutely was based on a 20-year experience of what didn't feel to be present for my daughter's care. But I'd say the particular angle I'm interested in is how the body has been ignored in terms of the early intervention development. I do feel one of the major omissions of that programme was taking people's bodies seriously, and I'll try and explain why that should be. I was interested in looking at asylums and the word chronic. If there's one word I'd like to remove from the English language, it would be the word chronic, as a self-fulfilling prophecy. But my daughter, compared to her two brothers, was facing two very different destinies. So Mary was, after a very difficult illness through children's services and then an acute adult ward, found herself in an old asylum in the practice area where I work. And I can illustrate it there were corridors where elderly men often were smoking heavily. Mary, because she had nothing to do, she was bored, she was given medicines that stimulated her appetite. The staff felt sorry for her and would give her extra helpings of puddings. There wasn't much else to do. The one thing Mary always did was to take her medicines. So Mary was, in a sense, that definition of the word chronic was the scariest thing really was that we almost believed it. We almost believed this message of despair. But there were things in Mary, and I guess things in our family, that just somehow held a slight thread of resisting this chronic. But Mary, compared to her brothers, now would look at something like a 15 to 20 year reduction in life expectancy, and quite a lot of that loss of life would be down to physical illness. Some of it would be down to the suicides that we saw happening in the environment she was in that early phase. But as what's become increasingly clear as Mary's got older is that most of her risks are to do with physical health risks. Mary also became ill at about the time that the second generation of antipsychotics were beginning to be marketed. And some of the things statistics that stood out for me at that time, so that was the era of Mary's development of illness. But people like Mary were about 5% more likely to be heavier than the general population in the early 90s. By the end of the 90s, after this introduction of second generation antipsychotics, that had climbed to 15%. So there's like a divergence here. In terms of smoking, the general population had gradually reduced smoking rates from about 30-odd% down to now under 20%. But for people in Mary's setting, 50, 60, 70% rates of smoking hasn't changed at all. This group have not benefited from the public health programs of the general population. So again, you get a sense of divergence compared to her brothers in our family. Risk of developing diabetes. Again, you'd anticipate with such a rapid rise in weight in this population. And sure enough, the parallel increase in rates of diabetes in all of us have actually been exceeded by people with severe mental illness, about 0.7% per year incrementally, from about the mid-90s, again the introduction of the second generation antipsychotics. So those are sort of stark things that I could see happening in our own family. this is a systematic review of the use of weight gain in people who take antipsychotic medicines. And the problem, I think, is that drug firms have been very skilled at marketing that their drug A is slightly better than drug B, but they've tended to look at the right-hand side. Often they've done studies, cheap studies, which take people who've already got established weight gain, and then argue that their drug is slightly better than this drug. And actually what's clear is if you then look more critically at the evidence and trace back the amount of weight gain, the actual average weight gain in people who are treatment naive to taking these medicines is 12 kilograms in the first 24 months. 12 kilograms. That's a huge amount of weight gain. That's a very unhealthy amount of weight gain. And to some extent, it's not necessarily completely to do with the antipsychotic medicine, but there's absolutely clear links between the medicines. So partly the fact that Mary had nothing to do, that she was given extra helpings of puddings, that she had a difficult life, but also was taking medicines that drove her appetite. And there's lots of debate about whether these medicines do cause things like diabetes. There's acknowledged to be a slightly higher rate of diabetes in the families of people who've got severe mental illness. However, this is what happened when healthy volunteers were given either olanzapine or aripiprazole, two of the popular antipsychotic medicines. Within 9 days, there was demonstrated evidence of insulin resistance. So this is the precursor of diabetes in the future. So these are healthy volunteers, they didn't have psychotic illness, they weren't obese, but within 9 days they were showing insulin resistance. And so Mary's trajectory, compared to her brothers, starting off in that environment I've described, over the last 10 to 15 years, has taken a completely different trajectory. So her likelihood of having high rates of diabetes and heart disease is 2, 3, 4 times higher than her brothers by her age now. She's 38. But a third of people of her age with this condition will biochemically be shifting towards diabetes, but often it's not known about, it's not being measured adequately. So there's a hugely high risk thing, very predictable, and I'd argue it's predictable from the early stage of being unwell. Now, I'm a GP, and apart from giving career advice to people on whether their daughters should become GPs, the other thing that GPs are quite good at doing is telling people what to do. And the thing is, if I talk to, we thought we should anonymise the cat as well. Sorry, Penny, but the thing is, if I threaten someone with early death or high rates of diabetes or heart disease, to be quite honest, if I'm an 18-year-old or 19-year-old, I'm probably not going to take much notice. But if my dress size changes, if I can't catch a bus, if I don't feel like my peers, it's an element of discrimination, if you like, or prejudice, that builds up on top of me having a mental illness. And I'd argue that that's what really hurts. And as a health professional, we need to understand where people are at. So I think threatening people with early death doesn't always change behaviours. I was also very influenced by a good, solid Welsh GP from down not that far from here, from near Swansea, Julian Tudor Hart. And he was a sort of mentor of I was a young GP once, and he was a mentor of young GPs, and he had this theory that the actual provision of medical healthcare, of healthcare, was inversely related to the need, required. And I would argue that people with severe mental illness actually have an inverse level of care offered them. All my experiences tell me that. I got made redundant a few years ago, and age 59, I was a bit bored, and I'd asked my very good daughter-in-law, Debbie, if she wanted a training session for her as a practice nurse and her colleagues. 20-odd nurses decided like a half-day session if I was free, old GP. And the practice managers blocked it because it wasn't core business. And apart from feeling ashamed, I also decided that for the next 4 years, this is why I'm still here, really. I felt deeply ashamed of how primary care was responding. And I'm also a GP advisor on National Audit that's just done a second round. And one of the things we discovered in the first round a couple of years ago, now it's just been replicated again, is that for people exactly of Mary's age now on average, that would be the average age of the people we looked at. We examined case records. And one of the things we asked was, is there a record of a comprehensive health check of the sort of things I've just talked about? And 2 years ago, 29% had a comprehensive health check, and now 33% have. In other words, it's just not up to scratch, particularly given that this population have such high risks. So to switch to more positive notes, also 4 years ago, myself and a lovely GP colleague, the late Helen Lester, ran a physical health symposium in a big early psychosis conference. It was the first time they'd ever had one. It was an achievement just to have a physical health symposium. And being English GPs, we said at the end of it, well, if anyone fancies a cup of tea, we're in that table over there, we'd like to meet other people of similar interest. And 6 people came, and one of them was Jackie Curtis from New South Wales, Sydney, and she was clutching a thing a bit like this, waving it, 2 sides of A4 with a very simple frame of the sort of things I've talked about in terms of what we should be measured, what we should be concerned about, and not just and to actually take action if we find there's something not right. Well, GPs have attention spans of gnats. I don't think there's any other GPs in the audience, but I can speak with authority. And so having a very simple resource that applied to me whether I was a nurse, a doctor, primary or secondary care, was immediately appealing. So I took this back to England to the National Audit, and I was instructed I had to nick it from Australia. I realised that actually what we set up in that very first conversation at the end of the symposium was a learning set. I was trying to think what it all meant, and I realised that what we started was a learning set. And that learning set sort of grew. It went in a sort of slightly odd direction. We never knew where it was going. We didn't really have an agenda, other than we thought this was an injustice. We actually thought this is not right. We're giving medicines out, things are happening to this population. There felt to be things that were wrong about this. So in a sense, that would be the focus of our learning set. And so apart from nicking this, and this has now become a sort of UK resource, and because of Helen died about 2 years ago, and we had a difficult conversation, but we called it the Leicester resource for that reason. Helen eventually said, "Oh, all right then." I'm very proud to have worked with Helen. She was amazing. She's qualified in Cardiff too. There's a nice Welsh connection. But Helen and I also worked with Jackie and many colleagues in Australia and increasingly over the world to try to create a consensus statement of what we thought should happen, what I should expect as a service user, as a family member. So it was very much a rights issue, and we've just and in a sense, I'm just picking up this is about the opportunity, and I suppose what I'm trying to illustrate is that the opportunity, as I can see it, is right at the beginning of this problem. That if we ignore the body early on in the evolution of the mental illness, particularly if we're going to give people treatments that do the sort of things I've described, then we're missing the opportunity. So this is an opportunity. That's from Hippocrates. And the prize is that if we can prevent a sort of 10% shift in weight, this is from the general population, we actually reduce premature mortality by 1/4. We have a dramatic effect on the rate of diabetes, lipids, all the things that generate my risk of developing future heart disease are greatly influenced by weight gain. And we have the opportunity to prevent the weight going on if we take this seriously early on, not to wait till it's become established. So that's the Leicester. So our learning set was talking about the injustice, and we launched this a year ago, and I suppose one of my thoughts is whether this might be of interest to this network, whether you want to join us in what we think is an injustice. And so, we've made outrageous requests for things like that. I would expect informed choice. If you're going to give me treatments, you should discuss with me the pros and the cons of these things. And if you are going to give me treatments, if I agree with you, then it's reasonable to expect some sort of baseline assessment of my risks of developing these other things. I would like to take care of my body as well as my mind. And to set standards so that we should actually target to prevent weight gain rather than waiting till it's happened and we'll deal with it later. To actually say it's important. It is important to us now to take this seriously. And one of the things that we're very keen to do is to promote the idea of physical wellness right from the beginning as a rights issue, not as a choice issue, but as a rights issue. I've put some copies on the desk, but we were accused of being aspirational, which is quite a cheap way of accusing things. And well, I'm not sure about that. Jackie's service in Sydney have just looked at the data that they've got for the first 3 months of treatment of a small cohort of people that have gone through their service with with a severe psychotic illness, and they've compared it with another service in New South Wales. And the only difference between the two services is Simon, the exercise physiologist, and Scott, the nutritionist, and the cultural ethos, which is that this is serious. And what they've delivered is, instead of the 7.6 kilograms weight gain that took place in the Liverpool service on the right, the Bondi service has increased its weight by 1.6 kilograms. And actually, the waist circumference is flat-lined. It looks as though it may have been slightly more muscle than fat. So the evidence suggests that you don't have to accept this 3-month trajectory. Now, if that was just one service, you'd say, well, they're enthusiasts. But actually, my ex-job share colleague, Joe Smith in Worcester, with an early intervention service, is just producing identical results in a collaboration working with Worcester University. So this isn't just aspirational, this is different. It's possible. And Rachel and I were involved in NICE guidelines, and they've actually put the HEAL declaration and the Leicester, and I don't know how we managed to do that. So we've got quite a strong endorsement for this, for our learning set. We've managed to actually get quite a wide buy-in from a whole range of organisations and people at the end of the day. And I think, again, it comes back to your experience with learning sets. I think what I take away from this mainly is the process. I've got to know people very well. I trust people. We're a more effective group than we were 4 years ago when there were 6 of us over a cup of tea. Where it goes, I don't know, but I touch the passion of this group, and it is making a difference. So Roberto and I, we've got an Italian version. We also have a Japanese version. We're going to be in Tokyo in about 3 weeks' time, I think. We're launching it there. So it has got a momentum. We haven't got a Welsh version, which is clearly a huge deficit. And I'd be happy to put that right. So just to conclude, this is Hippocrates. So what's in the physician's bag? If I'm going to be engaging in a conversation about treatments of an illness, then it's absolutely my business to try and not cause harm. Okay, so the very first contract, in my Hippocratic oath, is to first cause no harm. Interestingly, Hippocrates said that the safest way to health would be to give the right amount of nourishment and exercise. And I think that, we would have found the safest way to health. And I think what's really exciting is that actually, I think over the next 5 to 10 years, we'll increasingly understand that we may have some much greater answers in terms of people's physical well-being, their attention to nutrition and physical activity. Because I saw Mary become completely sedate. She did absolutely nothing, and sedentariness is very dangerous. I think we'll alter the course of mental illness potentially if we take much more care of our bodies as well as our minds. So it's a very holistic picture that I see. To just acknowledge, Helen Lester died about just under 2 years ago, and I've put a link onto a YouTube resource. If anyone wants to really understand how primary care can make a difference, then I suggest looking at that. Helen's an absolutely inspirational GP. I miss her dearly. And then the Australian, I think the official thing is Good On You Cobber. They've been an extraordinary group to work with, again, as a learning set, they're awesome. And various other people, the National Audit team who helped to do this resource, and Sue Bailey from the College of Psychiatrists. And I just wanted to finish just on a personal note. Mary was definitely written off by the system. Mary was not the message of hope. So there's a personal message here about the fact that families and people are, the importance of hope's come through the whole of today, and it's tangible for us. This was a family wedding a few years ago. There are grandkids emerging now. And also there's a message of hope in a sense for our family as well, because one of the things, I'd never seen the Carmarthen Hospital picture, but one of the things I actually know is that my grandfather had a recurring illness which took him in and out of Carmarthen Hospital. I used to come here for summer holidays to Cardigan every year of my childhood. It came out eventually that Grandad had been in Carmarthen Hospital, and he had a very sad end, I'm afraid, linked with his mental illness. And I advocate for my family. The job isn't done for me. You know, that I'm talking about 20 years' experience of supporting someone like my daughter, but actually there's another generation there, and I would never forgive myself if I hadn't done something about what I think is wrong. It's an injustice. That's where I'd like to end this talk. I think there's optimism that we can actually change this system, and that we should believe in people's bodies as well as their minds.